True Stories from D6 podcast. I'm Chuck Burnett. I am the Division A Director this year, working under the leadership of Troy Dukart, the Public Relations Manager for District 6. And as we approach the end of our very, very warm summer, we have a special guest today, Oumar Dieng of the Toro ProsE Toastmasters Club in Bloomington, Minnesota. And Oumar had reached out to us several months ago and was eager to share his story, his unique journey in Toastmasters. And it's, in his own words, it's a journey that includes stories of resilience, overcoming challenges, learning English, becoming a speaker, and lessons learned. And hopefully we'll hear a little bit more of how that's all led to his becoming a motivational speaker. So without any further delay, please welcome Oumar Dieng. Good morning, or good afternoon, Oumar. Welcome to True Stories from D6.
Good afternoon, Chuck. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've really been looking forward to talking with you and hearing about your journey in Toastmasters. So again, you are part of the Toro ProsE, and I guess I kind of hesitate on that because you spell it in an interesting way, right? It's capital P, small R-O, and then capital S-E. So if you look at it, it says like ProsE, but it's Toro ProsE Toastmasters. I think it's a very unique name for a club. Tell us a little bit about your club.
Yeah, absolutely. It's you're right. It's a very unique name. It's a play on words between, of course, the Toro, which is the company that's hosting our club, ProsE as in professionals, or as in prose, the poetry. And our club it's a club that was founded, I believe, back in 1984 by one of our members who used to work at Toro. And it's a very small, intimate, warm, welcoming club that really is one of the handful of clubs that has survived through thick and thin and fluctuations of whatever happens around the world and in the country. And so we're a small club of under 15 members, actually, and but we're a small and mighty club, however.
Okay. So I assume that you're probably meeting online, or have been for most of the last year.
Yeah, for most of the last year, we've been meeting online and actually doing hybrid meetings as well. We adopted the hybrid model when COVID hit almost immediately. And unfortunately, we're going back to doing more of the online meeting because of the advent of the Delta variant of COVID. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we're making it work. We are very flexible, and whatever we need to do to continue to meet, we will do.
Well, that's great. And yourself, as I mentioned, I'm hoping to hear more about your journey to becoming a motivational speaker. And I know that there is a path out there for motivational strategies. Is that by any chance your path, or tell us about the path that you've chosen?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I grew up being a very positive person. I always look on the bright side of things. I grew up being very, very introverted, which in fact, I grew up in a small country in West Africa called Senegal, and I was born in Mauritania. And what started my path, I now live in the United States. And of course, what started my path to getting to the US was really when I was younger. I spent time in a refugee camp as a result of some ethnic tensions between two countries, Mauritania, which is where I lived and where I was born. But my parents were originally from a country called Senegal. And there were ethnic tensions between the two countries that eventually, unfortunately, forced a lot of people to flee, including my family, from Mauritania and then go back to our home country in Senegal. And in the process, I got separated from my family. And really what pushed us to flee was the fact that a mob literally knocked on our front door with machetes and makeshift weapons and literally wanted to come in. Yeah. My sister and I managed to talk them down by speaking the local language, and we were dressed in local attire. And fast forward to my mother deciding that we had to leave the country. And in the process, my siblings left ahead of me, and my mom and I stayed behind. And one day she went out. We left the home that we lived at to stay with one of her friends. One night she left to check on the house and never came back. And turns out she was picked up by the military police during curfew. And that was the last time I saw her until much later. And yeah, I did reunite with her, but then I ended up being alone in the country. And as a result, ended up in a refugee camp where I spent a better part of 2 to 3 weeks or so before I was able to fly back to Senegal and reunite with my family, who by the way, thought that I was dead, I was killed, because they hadn't heard from me. So
I'm sorry, once again, how old were you at that time?
I was 16.
16.
I was 15, 16-ish. And at the time, it was really by the grace of God that my mom shared the address of the town where my uncle lived in Senegal. And I memorized that because she was repeating it so much to all of us in case we got separated. And then she had, in hindsight, that was a great idea, because as a result of that, I was able to find my uncle's home in Dakar, the capital of Senegal, and that's where they were, and we got reunited there. And so that was my journey, and of course I stayed in Senegal for a while, went to school there in high school. Didn't speak a word of English when I was in my early 20s, but was fascinated by the English language and started studying it in high school. And that led to me working part-time during the summer when I was off school as a tour guide, and actually met some of my wife, who was part of a study abroad program with Georgetown University, and that's how we kind of stayed in contact and got married as a result of that when I came to the U.S. And of course, I was always passionate of sharing my story, and every time I talked about who I was, where I was from, people found the story inspirational and it motivated them. And I then realized that there was a need to really share my story of not just resilience, but positivity, to always manage to look on the bright side of things. That, of course, led me to wanting to speak more and more and to hone my skills. And that's how I stumbled on Toastmasters, actually.
Okay. So did you learn about Toastmasters after you came to the United States, or had you heard of Toastmasters when you were still in Senegal?
No, I hadn't heard of Toastmasters when I was in Senegal. I actually heard about it when I came to the US. And I was actually, I think one night I was searching for a place or a venue where I could speak and share my message. And I remember when I was in college, I took a storytelling class and really fell in love with just public speaking and the whole the ability of someone standing in front of an audience and just literally incepting positive vibes or positive messages, or to get them to take action. And that's when I found out about Toastmasters and joined my first Toastmasters Club. I was speaking a little bit before I joined Toastmasters, but realized that for me to level up, I needed to really hone my skills. And Toastmasters was a way for me to do that, because it provided the platform and the venue for me to speak and tweak my speeches and get feedback right away, so that I can improve it before I take it to, let's say, a paid engagement or to a larger audience.
Yeah, it strikes me that for most of us, just public speaking in general is terrifying. Getting in front of a group. In your case, you had the additional challenge of learning English along the way. English wasn't your first language, and you managed to master that and the art of public speaking, which is absolutely incredible.
Yeah. I think that was a challenge, with the fact that, so of course I had to not only learn the language and learn the skills of being a good speaker, but also learn some additional things, like when English is not your first language, and you may notice this when you listen to other Toastmasters from other countries giving speeches, if they get nervous, they will tend to speak really, really fast, because when you get nervous, you tend to want to just be done with it. So you speak faster, and as a result, you start noticing that people are not enunciating.
Okay.
And if English is not your second language, it may be already difficult for the standard American audience or English audience to understand what you're saying. And when you speed up, it makes it more difficult. So I have to learn when I'm speaking to consciously slow down and consciously make sure that I am saying the words and enunciating them and slowing down my speech and watching my rate and my volume and so on to make sure people understand what I'm saying.
Well, that's a good point. I've always thought that one of the basic skills that we learn from Toastmasters is learning to pace ourselves. And I guess you're kind of saying the same thing, that it's like the more we rehearse a speech, the better we get at the timing and the pacing and getting the pauses in the right place. All those things are so important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, I think that's a good point, in that Toastmasters allows you to do all of those things. And if you don't get it right, you get feedback, you go tweak it and come back and potentially give the same speech until you feel comfortable with that particular speech. So I think that's one great thing that really, I think Toastmasters allowed me to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We always talk about having that safe place where we can talk. If it's a physical location, we can go into a room and close the door, or if it's a Zoom meeting, it's only those people on the call that hear it. It takes all that anxiety out of it. I mean, you've got a familiar audience and you can try new things. And if it doesn't work out, you can come back and try it again, and get it the way you want it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think from there, I did bounce from club to club, just to because of the fact that most of the clubs that I joined were tied with an employer. So I've been with, I think it was called Cultivated Toastmasters in Hopkins, Minnesota. Then I was with Crosstown Talkers rather. And then Cultivated Toastmasters in St. Paul. Then, of course, I ended up with this wonderful club of ours, Toro ProsE. But one thing that I found that was common across all those clubs was the fact that the decorum and the basis of what Toastmasters was always reflected across those clubs. So whether you go to a different city or a different country, it's the same, right? I've had a chance to listen in to a club that was in London, just out of curiosity, and found that it was really the same thing. That experience is brought through no matter what club you go to, basically.
Yeah, I'm always struck by the same thing. This year, along with Division A, I'm also serving as the area director for a number of the clubs in Minneapolis, and I'm always struck by how uniform the clubs are. Each club has their unique parts of their agenda, but by and large, it's the same Toastmasters branded meeting format, and so you feel really comfortable and welcome when you join another club.
Right, absolutely.
So Toastmaster ProsE or Toro ProsE, I assume it's a corporate club, or is it open to others, or?
It is open to any member. It's hosted within Toro in Bloomington, off of Lindale.
Right.
But anyone can join, including, because we have the hybrid model. We've gotten some members, interestingly enough, from experimenting with Facebook and our Facebook page. We managed to get some interest from that, and people joining us virtually, or at least expressing the interest to join us virtually, which is crucial nowadays. It's interesting to see the shift between in-person to virtual, and how that actually, even though it's virtual, there are a set of skills that we also have to learn and understand. Because beyond just speaking, one of the other things I do actually on the side is I coach people via Zoom, and I do different things, including teaching them how to be more resilient and various things. And it's interesting that how some of the skills that you learn in person do transfer to the virtual environment when you're speaking virtually. For example, making eye contact with the lens rather than staring at the screen, which drives me crazy when I watch interviews on national TV and see people do that. But some of those things are things that you learn by joining Toastmasters, for example.
Right. So I think being a motivational speaker is so difficult. I think a lot of it has to do not only with knowing your message and knowing your own personal story, but also understanding the needs of the audience, and to be able to connect the two, to be able to I don't know, produce a particular feeling, or to motivate your speakers and your listeners in any particular way. But what's the biggest challenge with becoming a motivational speaker?
I think the biggest challenge is the imposter syndrome, to be honest, because when we want to step up or want to become a motivational speaker and want to speak in front of a different audience other than Toastmasters, we run into the questions that pop up, which is things like, wait a minute, who am I to think that I can go speak to a larger audience, or I can get paid for my speech or my public speaking? But what we don't realize is that every single one of us has life experiences and a background and some things that they went through that another person can find useful, right? You can have a very affluent speaker come speak to an audience and not necessarily convince everyone that they should be taking that action or taking that next step or whatever they need to do based on the message of the speaker. But someone can come from, let's say, a dad or a mom can come up, get on stage and say something, or maybe the way they say it or an experience that they share that is really, really identifiable to an audience member, that actually could cause them to take an action that will change their lives. Okay. And when you realize that it's not about you, it's not about whether you have the quote unquote guru skills to be able to be a paid speaker. You realize that it's about your message. What can you share? What stories can you share with your audience that could potentially change their lives because they particularly connected with you and not the other speaker? And that's priceless. And Chuck, you can stand in front of an audience, say something. I can give the same speech and people will connect with you differently than they will connect with me, for example. And when you realize that, you're going to start setting that imposter syndrome aside and just going for it and just asking. And to be able to speak, you have to ask. And people, unfortunately, don't get that far enough to ask to be allowed to speak.
Yeah. So, I think that's fascinating. I know with my own experience and hearing different types of speakers, oftentimes like yourself, the speaker is coming from a whole different set of life experiences than my own, and yet they're sharing an experience that it resonates with me. I can connect with it in some way, right. And I feel a connection to that person. So
exactly,
it is a very interesting process there.
Yeah.
Well, Oumar, we're kind of reaching the end here, and as I mentioned earlier, I always like to end these interviews with asking if you would make a message to both the people that are in Toastmasters now, particularly in District 6, but also those that maybe are on the fence. They're listening to this interview and they're wondering about Toastmasters as a way to develop themselves. Do you have a message for all of us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for those who are already within Toastmasters and that are maybe considering leveling up or maybe taking on public speaking as something that you want to do as a second career, or I would say that you really have to just go for it. If you feel like no one is going to allow you to speak, start speaking for free. Contact another Toastmasters Club, offer to give a speech. It doesn't have to be paid at first. It could be anything really that allows you to get on stage and speak, because what comes out of that is the fact that people will hear you speak and someone may identify with what you're saying and like your message enough to invite you to speak, right? So a quick example is I did give a speech about resilience. I think it was called the 5 tips to a resilient club during the summer Toastmaster Leadership Institute. And I've gotten some invitations to speak to other clubs out of that. And I wasn't expecting anything out of it. I did it because I was trying to give something back to the club, to Toastmasters in general. So that's one thing, just really start speaking. The other thing, for those who are on the fence about joining Toastmasters, the first step is generally the hardest, but it's now easier than ever. You can find a club that meets virtually or that has a hybrid model where you can just join as a guest and listen. And if you don't like what you hear or you don't want to come back, there is no obligation. You can just not come back, really. But I guarantee, if you attend a meeting as a guest, you're going to want to come back, because the camaraderie and the things that you learn from that one appearance as a guest and just listening can really change your life, and it can transfer to your personal career. It can transfer to even your leadership skills, your personal development skills. It gives you more than you can ever imagine. So that's what I would say, Chuck, to anyone who's on the fence.
Yeah. Well, I really like the thought of that. It gives you more than you ever could imagine. I couldn't have expressed it any better. Well, Oumar, again, thank you for your time tonight and telling us a little bit about your fascinating journey. And I certainly hope that the two of us can connect sometime. Maybe
Absolutely.
Maybe when we start meeting in person again, we can actually meet. So
absolutely. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. So thank you again, and I hope you have a good evening.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me.
Sure.